The night was supposed to be simple, ordinary, and free of trouble. Marcus and Malcolm Johnson, identical twins, born minutes apart, had returned to their hometown for the first time in years. They were men carved by discipline, tested by fire, and forged through years of service. Yet when they walked into the dimly lit bar at the edge of town, dressed casually in jeans and hoodies, nobody knew who they were. To the world, they looked like any other two young black men stepping into a place where the regulars weren't used to seeing faces like theirs. The jukebox hummed a country tune, stale beer filled the air, and conversations fell silent as the twins walked in. Eyes darted, whispers followed, and the bartender's forced smile betrayed the unease lingering in the room. But the brothers carried themselves with quiet dignity, ignoring the stares. Marcus, the older by 7 minutes, nodded toward a booth in the back, while Malcolm shrugged off the tension and joked, "Small town welcome committee still hasn't changed." They sat down, ordered sodas, neither drank alcohol, and began catching up, laughing about childhood memories and the life lessons their late father, a decorated veteran himself, had instilled in them. Yet beneath their easy smiles, both men were trained soldiers with instincts honed sharper than any blade. They could sense when danger was brewing. And that night it brewed fast. 2 officers walked in, uniforms pressed, egos puffed. They were local cops, not accustomed to seeing strangers, especially black strangers in their space. Officer Reynolds, tall with a sneer permanently etched on his face, nudged his partner, Officer Kincaid, and whispered loud enough for half the bar to hear. "Looks like trouble walked in. Tonight." Their boots echoed as they approached. The booth. The room held its breath, every patron watching, waiting. Marcus felt his jaw tighten, but he stayed calm. Malcolm's eyes flickered with fire, but he too restrained himself. "Evening, gentlemen," Reynolds said mockingly, resting his hand on his belt near his holstered weapon. "Mind telling me what you're doing here?" The question dripped with condescension, as if 2 grown men had to explain their right to exist. Marcus responded evenly, his voice low but steady. "Same as everyone else, having a drink, catching up." But the officer wasn't satisfied. He leaned closer, invading their space. "Don't get smart with me, boy," he hissed. The word boy cutting deep, a word meant to belittle, to remind them of an ugly history that still clung like a shadow. Malcolm's fists curled under the table. His breathing slowed, the way it did before missions overseas. He had faced armed insurgents, survived ambushes in hostile deserts, yet here he was, back on American soil, being treated as if his life held no worth. The bar grew tense. Someone muttered, "Just leave 'em be," but the officers ignored it. Reynolds smirked and ordered, "Stand up, both of you." The twins exchanged a look, silent communication, something they'd perfected through years of brotherhood and service. They knew escalation was a trap, so they stood, calm and deliberate, towering over the officers, their physiques betraying years of training. That only made Reynolds bristle. He shoved Marcus in the chest. "I said ID now." Marcus slowly pulled out his wallet, handing over his license without a word. Malcolm did the same. The officers glanced at the IDs, scoffed, and handed them back without even reading the names. "Doesn't matter who you are," Reynolds sneered. "Around here you don't belong." The air thickened with hostility. The crowd was frozen between fear and fascination, some secretly recording on their phones. The twins stood like statues, refusing to be baited. But then Kincaid, trying to prove himself, spat words that burned the air. "Maybe we should take them out back. Teach 'em some manners." The silence broke into murmurs. Marcus felt the old lessons from his father echoing. "Never let anger guide you. Son, control is your greatest weapon." He placed a hand on Malcolm's arm, grounding him, keeping him from exploding. But the officers weren't done. Reynolds pulled out his baton, tapping it against his palm. "Hands where I can see them. Both of you." His voice carried the weight of a man drunk on power, certain that fear would force obedience. The twins raised their hands slowly, but their eyes never wavered. They had been in war zones where seconds determined life or death. They knew how to read men like Reynolds, bully types, insecure, dangerous because they mistook authority for strength. The room was suffocating, the tension unbearable. And then the unthinkable. Reynolds shoved Malcolm hard against the booth, pressing the baton across his chest. "Resist and you'll regret it," he snarled. Malcolm's mind flashed, not of fear, but of restraint, of the oath he had taken, of the brothers he had led into battle who never came home. He could break Reynolds in seconds, disarm him before anyone blinked. But he didn't. He held still, his eyes piercing into the officers, not with submission, but with quiet defiance. Marcus stepped forward, his voice controlled but sharp. "You're making a mistake." Reynolds laughed bitterly. "The only mistake here is thinking you can walk in like you own the place." He didn't know. He had no idea who he was speaking to. He didn't know that the man he was threatening had commanded elite soldiers, that the other had led Navy SEALs through missions so classified their stories would never reach the light of day. To Reynolds and Kincaid, they were just two black men who needed to be reminded of their place. But the bar knew different. Whispers spread. A few patrons recognized the twins, remembering the local news stories about their military achievements years back. One man in the corner whispered, "Aren't those the Johnson boys? The ones who went military?" Another hushed him quickly, fearing to draw the officers. Wrath. The twins stood silently, absorbing the humiliation, the sting of injustice, the rage boiling under their calm exterior. They didn't move, didn't break, because they knew a storm was coming. The cops thought they held power, but power is a fragile thing. It crumbles when truth is revealed. That revelation hadn't come yet, but it was building. Outside, sirens wailed faintly in the distance, the sound of more officers arriving. Someone must have called for backup. The trap was closing, the night spiraling into something no one in that bar would ever forget. Marcus looked at his brother, and without a word spoken, both men understood this was only the beginning. And as the first flash of blue lights danced against the windows, Marcus whispered, so only Malcolm could hear, "Not yet. Let them dig their own hole." The brothers stood tall, unshaken, as the crowd watched history writing itself in real time. The bar was no longer a bar. It was a stage, a battleground of perception, where two men trained to defend freedom, abroad, were about to face the battle of their lives at home. Because sometimes the greatest wars are fought without guns, without bombs. Sometimes they are fought with patience, dignity, and the will to hold back until the right moment strikes. That night, the Johnson twins held their ground, waiting for the moment that would turn the hunters into the hunted, the accusers into the accused. And that moment was coming. The night outside the bar burned with flashing blue and red lights as more patrol. Cars screeched to a halt, the squeal of tires cutting through the tense silence inside. Dozens of eyes were glued to the Johnson twins as 6 more officers pushed into the bar. Radios crackling, hands hovering near weapons. The bartender ducked nervously behind the counter. Patrons froze in their seats, and phones recorded quietly, the glow of screens catching the sweat on nervous brows. Officer Reynolds puffed his chest, believing backup meant victory, and shoved Malcolm harder against the booth, snarling, "Now you'll learn not to mess with the law." But Marcus stepped forward, his calmness unsettling, his voice carrying the authority of a man who had led soldiers into war. "Careful," he said softly, his words razor-sharp. "You don't know who you're dealing with." Reynolds barked a laugh, waving to the newly arrived officers. "Cuff them both. Make sure they don't walk out of here so cocky." The others hesitated. Something about the way Marcus spoke, the way Malcolm's eyes burned with restrained fire, made them uneasy. Still, 2 officers stepped forward with cuffs in hand, ready to bind them like criminals. That was the moment Marcus let his patience end. With one swift movement, faster than any eye in the bar could follow, Marcus gripped Reynolds' wrist, twisting it just enough to make the baton clatter to the floor without causing injury. At the same instant, Malcolm stepped sideways, disarming the officer reaching for him with a precision so fluid it looked choreographed. Gasps erupted. The officers stumbled back, stunned. For a second, chaos threatened to erupt, but Marcus raised his voice, commanding, booming, the kind of voice trained over years of issuing orders in the field. "Stand down!" The word echoed through the bar, shaking everyone into silence. Even the officers froze. Marcus reached into his back pocket, not for a weapon, but for the leather case he carried at all times. He flipped it open and laid it on the table for all to see. The gold badge gleamed under the dim light. The inscription clear, U.S. Army Captain Marcus Johnson. The bar gasped. Murmurs rippled through the room. But before anyone could process, Malcolm stepped forward too, pulling out his own identification and even higher rank. The kind that carried weight in military circles worldwide. Navy SEAL Commander Malcolm Johnson. The room fell into stunned silence, broken only by the officer nearest, whispering, "Oh my God!" The revelation hit like a thunderclap. The men they had mocked, threatened, and nearly assaulted weren't just citizens. They were decorated military leaders, men who had bled for the country, men whose names carried respect in corridors of power these officers could never dream of entering. Reynolds' smug grin melted into horror. He stammered, This doesn't change." But Marcus cut him off, his words sharp as steel. "It changes everything. You didn't see two men. Tonight you saw stereotypes. You saw color. You saw threats where there were none. And you disgraced the badge you wear." His voice thundered through the bar, every syllable heavy with truth. Malcolm stepped beside him, his tone calm yet cutting. "We've faced warlords, terrorists, and enemies who swore to destroy us, yet never, not once, did. They make us feel smaller than you just did in our own country." His words pierced deeper than any weapon could. The crowd erupted in applause, some patrons even standing, tears shining in their eyes. Reynolds staggered back, speechless. The younger officers looked at one another, shame coloring their faces. One finally muttered, We didn't know." Marcus's eyes blazed. "That's the problem. You never cared to know. You thought your uniform gave you power, when in truth, it should give you duty to protect, not to prey." Malcolm placed a steady hand on his brother's shoulder, nodding. "Respect isn't demanded by force. It's earned by integrity." Cameras flashed as patrons continued to record, the videos destined to spread across the internet, exposing the night for what it truly was, a lesson in arrogance, prejudice, and the resilience of two men who refused to bow. Suddenly, one of the older officers stepped forward. Sergeant Harris, grizzled and weary, had been watching from the corner. He saluted, not mockingly, but with genuine respect. "Captain, Commander, I apologize on behalf of this department." The room froze again. The officers who had come in guns blazing now looked humbled, caught between fear and shame. Reynolds tried to protest, sputtering. They were suspicious. "I was doing my job." But no one backed him. The truth was laid bare. His job had not been justice. It had been fueled by prejudice. And now, under the bright light of truth, he stood stripped of power. Marcus and Malcolm exchanged a look. Brothers in blood. Brothers in battle, now brothers standing tall against injustice at home. Marcus spoke once more, his voice quiet but carrying weight. "The uniform you wear is supposed to mean something. It's supposed to stand for honor, sacrifice, and service. Don't ever forget that. Don't ever disrespect it again," Malcolm added, "because next time you judge a man by the color of his skin instead of the content of his character, you may not just embarrass yourself, you may destroy lives." His words landed heavy, echoing in the stunned silence of the bar. The brothers turned, collected their belongings, and walked toward the door. Nobody dared to stop them. Patrons moved aside as if parting for kings. Respect now flooding the room where contempt once lived. Outside, the night air was cool, crisp, filled with the hum of silence after the storm. The lights from the squad cars flashed, but none of the officers moved to block their path. As they stepped into the night, a young boy watching from across the street whispered to his father, "Who are they?" The father, eyes glistening with pride, answered, softly, "Heroes. Real heroes." And with that, the twins disappeared into the night, leaving behind a bar forever changed, a department forced to confront its own demons, and a story that would ripple through social media, news outlets, and conversations across the nation. But to Marcus and Malcolm, it wasn't about fame or attention. It was about principle, about standing tall even when the world tried to break you down, about showing that true strength is not in violence but in discipline, not in arrogance but in humility. not in oppression, but in justice. And as the night swallowed their figures, when truth remained undeniable, the Johnson twins were more than soldiers, more than leaders. They were symbols of resilience, dignity, and the unwavering fight for respect. If this story touched your heart, if it inspired you, then don't just watch. Be part of this journey. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell, because we have more stories that reveal the battles, the courage, and the victories that define the human spirit. Together, let's keep these voices alive,